Part 96. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 956. In fact, in order to strengthen his subordinates, Wang Ling spent almost half of his points during this period. In the Wolf Group alone, more than half of them have been injected with basic strengthening agents, and more than a quarter of them have been injected with intermediate strengthening agents. Agent. The proportion of people who have been strengthened in the Eagle Group is relatively small, but the total number of people who have been strengthened by all types of people is dozens of people. However, the critical point of this large-scale mind control is the 5-star Special Forces level. Many people in the army have not yet reached this critical point after strengthening, and have been tragically defeated by mind control. The remaining troops, because of the sudden incident and lack of reaction, were killed by other comrades who had controlled them. The remaining troops realized later and resisted desperately, but their numbers continued to decrease, so that after a large number of reinforcements, now the two field groups combined only have these 50 or 60 people left. Although the number of people has dropped sharply, the surviving group of people are top elites. Together with the remaining defense buildings, air force, and mindless troops in the base, they fought back with all their strength, making the attacking troops unable to capture them for a while. This base. Chug tug tug. Da da da. Rumble. The brutal battle was staged in the base, and it was particularly eye-catching. Because of Wang Ling's strengthening and switching of arms, this group of troops did not have a single type of arms. The magnetic blast infantry unit headed by Sun De, who used armed mining vehicles as human shields. The tanks and infantry that use long-range electric shock counterattack can kill a large number of infantry with each round of bombardment, and even some armored troops are included. There are also SEALs, who focus on blocking the attacking infantry and keeping them at bay, while the rest of the mobilized troops can only concentrate their fire and attack all targets indiscriminately. Under such a blockage, the controlled infantry could not get close to the defense line. Anyone who broke in would be killed immediately. However, the troops being controlled were not just infantry. While Sun De and others were fighting hard, the armored troops from the rear also rushed up. There are many elites in the armored units of the Wolf Group and Eagle Group, and their firepower when attacking Yuri's base left a deep impression on the enemy. But now, this powerful firepower is used on his own troops. Especially the elite Apocalypse tank. This thing has extremely powerful firepower, but after all, it cannot resist mind control. Now it has all fallen, and its guns are aimed at its own troops. As several rumbling cannons were heard, the armed mining vehicles serving as human shields in front exploded one after another. The human shield was broken, and the troops in the rear came under direct fire. Explosive shells blasted inside, killing 4 soldiers immediately. Whoosh! 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 But just when these elite Apocalypse tanks were planning to kill everyone, several ace-level Chrono Legion soldiers suddenly broke into the rear. They divided their forces and cooperated to control all the Apocalypse tanks in front of them through time and space. These Apocalypse tanks happened to be lined up in a one shape, blocking the troops at the rear and unable to cross over for a while. Taking advantage of this gap, several terrifying robots actually took the initiative to attack, bypassing the side and getting into the Apocalypse tank behind. Dong dong. Boom boom. In the middle of the stalemate, an armed helicopter deployed in the distance actually opened fire from a very long distance and penetrated into the troops of Sun De and others. It killed 4 people with several consecutive shots. Buzz buzz. Da da da. However, before these deployed armed helicopters could kill too many people, the uncontrollable armed helicopters broke out and blasted them with concentrated fire in an Air Force manner. However, the price was also very high. The other anti-aircraft tracked vehicles that were cooperating with the troops to attack the base building turned their gun barrels after noticing the targets in the air, and focused their fire on the armed helicopters. Under the bombardment, one after another one plane fell. What a mess! This sudden turmoil brought the entire base to the edge of destruction. Although the remaining troops fought desperately to defend it, their numbers continued to decrease under this turmoil. Big Tiger. But just when these people were so desperate that they were about to fight to the death, Wang Ling's voice suddenly came from the radio. Yes, after checking the situation of his base, Wang Ling was extremely anxious. Later, because the command post had not exploded yet, he tried to call through the base's communication radio, and he contacted the base team leader. Sun Dehu and others, who were originally desperate, suddenly became excited when they heard Wang Ling's voice. Erlu immediately asked, "Team leader, where are you? What is going on? Why were they suddenly controlled?" The contents of the meeting had no time to be announced to the public before the Mind Empire took action. Now the troops in the major bases have no idea what happened. Wang Ling shouted, "Don't ask so many questions, I don't have time to answer you. Listen up, everyone retreats immediately, leaving the Qingshan mountain without fear of running out of firewood, relying on the base building, and hurriedly exits, the farther away. Okay, I'll pick you up now. Team leader, you can't retreat. If you retreat, the base will be finished." Sun Dehu was stubborn. But then Wang Ling got yelled at, "Stop talking nonsense to me. Everyone is dead, and you still have to do shit to the base. Who the hell is the team leader? You don't even listen to what I say? Retreat now, wait for me to pass." Yes. Team leader, please pay attention to your safety. Finally, the stubborn donkey recognized it. Time was tight and there was little time to chat, so the radio was cut off. But his words were also heard by the generals behind him. One of the allied generals immediately became worried. "Wang Ling, you can't leave. If you leave, what will happen if those troops attack? Stop talking nonsense to me. Is it your turn to tell me what I want to do?" However, Wang Ling was already furious, so how could he listen to this? He even opened his mouth and yelled back, "It doesn't matter what rank you are, General." After so long of joint operations, this was the first time for everyone to see Wang Ling so angry. For a while, no one dared to say a word. Even the commanders of the two armies chose to remain silent. The scolded the general was even more frightened. Of course, Wang Ling was furious, but he did not lose his mind. His subordinates were important, but these generals were more important. Before the rescue, things here should be dealt with temporarily. To this end, Wang Ling specifically strengthened himself into the form of the Wild Beast King, releasing a space-time fluctuation circle that enveloped everyone present. With one time travel movement, he arrived at the mountainside where Yuri's base was during the previous battle. Hiding here, even if the group of controlled troops wanted to attack, it would have been very difficult. That's not all. After placing these generals in a few seconds, Wang Ling turned around and moved through time and space again, arriving at the periphery of the fallen Allied base. After a few seconds, he ended his frozen state and maintained his strongest form. Sheng Sheng moved through time and space to the vicinity of the command post, stretched out her hand and blew it up. Swish. Da-da-da. During this process, a nearby light prism tower reacted hurriedly, and a light prism ray hit Wang Ling. A group of infantry not far away also opened fire and bombarded Wang Ling. But Wang Ling didn't care about this at all and used the form of the Wild Beast King to resist. Whoosh. Boom. Whoosh. Boom. Of course, the resistance was not in vain. With these bombardments, Wang Ling moved through time and space twice in succession, blowing up the spy satellite and the air command center. Only then did he achieve his goal and leave the base instantly. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 957. The Holy City War Zone has fallen, and only the three remaining base buildings are acting as living targets, stalling for time. And how much better can the situation be in other war zones? Almost all war zones are in the same situation. In the Gobi war zone, because of the Wolf Group and the Eagle Group, there are still dozens of infantry resisting. This is the best situation in all war zones. Under normal circumstances, when encountering such a sudden change, these soldiers are basically hopeless and can only wait for their original troops to annihilate them one by one. However, Wang Ling didn't believe in evil, so he could still try something by relying on time and space movement. However, in the Holy City war zone, there are also generals from the two armies that he needs to protect more. The situation before him is quite a choice. But Wang Ling didn't play according to the routine, so he had to protect both. In the Holy City war zone, the generals were moved halfway up the mountain. Relying on the steep terrain, even if the enemy wanted to attack, it would take a lot of effort. Then the satellites and air command headquarters of the Allied base were blown up, which was equivalent to blinding the eyes of the Mind Empire in the Holy City war zone. It became a problem to find the specific locations of the generals. In a short period of time, those who were protected generals' safety. The cost of doing so is not small. Wang Ling was in a hurry and did not clean up the defense forces of the Allied base in advance. He resisted the whole process. If he had a health bar above his head, he would probably not be able to do so now. Already half the loss. However, Wang Ling didn't bother to check his injuries. He had suffered more serious injuries anyway. After leaving the Allied base, Wang Ling immediately judged the direction of the Gobi war zone and moved there through time and space. Halfway up the mountain, the group of generals saw Wang Ling blowing up the Allied base through electronic video, and they were quietly relieved in their hearts. However, after seeing Wang Ling really leaving the Holy City war zone to rescue his subordinates, a group of generals suddenly felt uncertain. Indeed, they are in a safe state now, but they are only relatively safe. After all, they are still in the Holy City war zone. After the controlled troops have pushed back the buildings of the base, the next step is to find their traces. Although this place is not easy to find, it is only a matter of time before you find it. If Wang Ling fails to return in time, Agent Tanya alone will not be able to protect their group of generals. The coalition generals can respect Wang Ling, but in this case they can only trust Wang Ling unconditionally. However, as for the Allied forces, some generals became upset when they thought of this possible bad situation. What are Wang Ling talking about? Is the safety of his subordinates more important than ours? He doesn't even have the rank of an officer. It's already an exception for him to participate in the general meeting. How dare he get angry at us? I think he is used to being unscrupulous. Alliance Army, do you usually treat him like this? Each of these generals said one sentence after another, as if the negative energy accumulated in their hearts had found a breakthrough, and vented it all on Wang Ling. However, the coalition forces did not tolerate them, and General Luo scolded them directly. Damn it, you are a bunch of ungrateful white-eyed wolves. Was it Wang Ling who did the mind control? Wasn't it Wang Ling who saved your lives? This is good. Not only are you not grateful, but you are also sarcastic. In my opinion, I shouldn't have saved you and let you be slaughtered by the rebels. You're ridiculous. You're a dignified officer, but you don't even know what to say. Are you talking so dirty? The Allied general who was scolded had a look of uncertainty on his face. Although he was wrong, he was still venting his anger. Then, General Li Wiki also responded, Lao Luo speaks in this style, not only to you, but also to us. But what he said is indeed true. Our lives were saved by Wang Ling. It's not your turn to make irresponsible remarks about what he's going to do now. Snort. But one of the Allied generals was still venting his grievances. Why is it not our turn? Who initiated the meeting? At this juncture, we initiated an officers' meeting and brought all of us together, and we almost got kicked out of it. Shit. General Luo scolded again. Can you, mother-in-law, be better at deflecting blame? Without this officer meeting, you are all at the base. I think how many of you can survive now? Another coalition general echoed, yes, this statement makes sense. The officers' meeting brought us together, and Agents Wang Ling and Tanya protected us, so we could survive. Otherwise, how would you have survived? Is fate barking like crazy here? That's enough. We are still blaming each other at this juncture. Is this what officers should do? Although the Allied general's face was somewhat flushed, he still wanted to vent the negative energy in his heart, but PoortoRich suddenly interrupted everyone with a loud roar. General Bob's face was extremely sad, and he gave the complaining generals a look. Shut up, you guys, so you don't embarrass yourself. Both commanders spoke, and the quarrel finally came to an end. After the scene was silent for a while, General Bob sighed, we lost this time. We owe our survival to Wang Ling. When he saw Wang Ling being able to use the Chrono Legion soldiers so flexibly, to be honest, we are all very unhappy. But now it seems that we are superficial. Agent Tanya also answered, General, almost all the war zones have fallen. If Wang Ling is alone, we are still in danger. What can we do now? At least think of a way to survive. That's right, PoortoRich also said, Wang Ling is working hard, and we old guys can't hold back the young people. Now, let alone how to solve the problem of mind control, the top priority is to find a place to settle down. So we can survive. Everyone immediately searches the electronic map to see if there is any safe place for us to stay. Yes, Commander, a group of Allied generals responded quickly. After checking, the Allied generals also glanced at each other. Finally, after General Bob nodded in agreement, he followed suit. Whoosh! 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 On the other hand, after Wang Ling left the Holy City War Zone, he has been moving continuously in the direction of the Gobi War Zone across time and space. Each move is long enough to span several war zones, and each time it takes dozens of seconds. Stiff time. And whenever the freezing time ended, Wang Ling continued to move, not daring to waste even a second. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 958. Whoosh! 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 The chrono movement is still going on. He is worried about his old subordinates in the Gobi War Zone. Wang Ling is going crazy now. After the stiff time of each chrono movement, he doesn't even have time to breathe and starts again immediately. It stopped moving, leaving only traces of time-space fluctuations and footprints with little blood stains. Before the rescue, Wang Ling had forced his way through the Allied base alone. He had withstood all the attacks and blew up its command post, air command headquarters and spy satellites. His injuries were serious. After experiencing advanced enhancement, Wang Ling's wound recovery ability has far surpassed that of ordinary elite soldiers. However, during the stiff time after the chronomovement, Wang Ling could not do anything, and his body's injuries could not be recovered, so that this traveling across time and space all the way, you are moving forward with injuries, and there is no time to recover at all. That's all in the world of Red Alert. During the time travel, no one knows his condition. But woof woof. Woof woof. In the real world, Wang Ling's body also suffered from a large number of wounds, and naturally a large amount of blood oozed out. When the deep consciousness moved through time and space, the body in the real world could not recover from the wounds. As time went by, then the blood actually stained his entire bed sheet and bedding, and the strong smell of blood woke up Xiao He, who was sleeping soundly. He rushed to Wang Ling's bed and screamed wildly. What's wrong, Xiao He? Brother He, weren't you asleep just now? What's going on? In the dormitory, Wei Bowen and the three of them were still staying up late playing games and did not notice Wang Ling's physical changes. However, they were startled by Xiao Hei's actions. After questioning, they all came forward. Ouch! What a strong smell of blood! Wang Ling. After approaching Wang Ling's bed, the three of them could smell the smell of blood even though their sense of smell was not as good as Xiao Hei's. When they looked at Wang Ling again, they were shocked by the red quilt. Zhang Shen was a little more courageous. He stepped forward and lifted Wang Ling's quilt. He found that Wang Ling's pajamas were also covered with blood, so he quickly untied his pajamas. Only then did he see his body, so the three of them everyone took a deep breath. I saw that Wang Ling's body was covered with bullet holes, and there were even 3 festering burns. Bones could even be seen on his shoulders, and blood was now seeping from them. Although Wang Ling has now become abnormally strengthened, how can attacks by allied troops and defensive buildings be child's play? This was only half health damage. Wang Ling had been seriously injured more than once with residual health, and the injuries were much more serious than this one now. It can be seen how much hardship Wang Ling has suffered in the world of Red Alert. It is indeed not surprising that he has the ability he has now. However, Wei Bowen and the others didn't know this. Seeing Wang Ling in this state, they were all frightened. FCK, Wang Ling, what did you do? How did you get hurt like this? There's so much bleeding, don't die. What are you talking about? After giving Dongfang Yuking a look, Zhang Shenke put his fingers next to Wang Ling's nostrils. You are energetic and breathing evenly. That's weird, he is like this. Oh, I remembered, Red Alert World. Wang Ling said that when he was deeply hypnotized, he was injured in the Red Alert World, and he would be injured in reality. This must be an injury in the Red Alert World. Is it so weird? How is Wang Ling doing now? Stop his bleeding first. Stop the bleeding? Do you know how to do that? Is there such a tool in the dormitory? It's better to call the emergency number quickly. Wait a minute, wake him up first. Okay, Wang Ling, wake up. Seeing Wang Ling's injury for the first time, the three of them were extremely anxious. After chattering for a while, they called for Wang Ling one after another, but they did not dare to shake him at all. However, Wang Ling was not moved at all and remained in this state. In fact, when he was in the Red Alert World, Wang Ling couldn't hear the sounds in reality, let alone now that he was moving across time and space in a hurry, and he was in a frozen state almost all the time. Of course, Uncle He could hear it and even intervene to remind Wang Ling. However, Uncle He was used to Wang Ling's injuries and didn't think it was serious. In comparison, he felt that what Wang Ling was doing in the Red Alert World was more important. After all, this was the first time for Uncle He to see Wang Ling looking so anxious. Whoosh! 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 As for Wang Ling, he was still moving continuously through time and space. He didn't care about the extremely serious injuries of his 3 roommates, but he just wanted to rescue his subordinates as soon as possible. When he moved across time and space, he naturally traveled in a straight line between the 2 areas, moving in between. Occasionally, he also broke into a turbulent war zone, and happened to appear on the edge of the turbulent base. This base is an allied base with no buildings under control. At this moment, the turbulent troops in the base are cleaning up the mess and bombarding the last few pitiful buildings. Because the air command and spy satellites all exploded, the electronic map here was blinded, and the rioting troops were unable to detect Wang Ling for a while. However, once he moved, he was frozen for dozens of seconds. During this long time, some peripheral troops discovered it at the last moment. 2 elite-level multifunctional infantry vehicles immediately rushed over and fired explosive shells one after another. Missile. After this infantry vehicle reached the elite level, the attack power of the missiles suddenly increased. If Wang Ling resisted with half health, he would risk being killed. Whoosh! Fortunately, at the last moment, Wang Ling's stiffness was lifted, and he immediately moved out of time and space, leaving the place and letting the missiles miss. If it were normal times, Wang Ling would still have the intention to harass them, but now, he had neither time nor thought, so he forgot about it after leaving. Of course, that's not entirely ignored. Although he seemed unable to do anything when he was stiff, he was actually conscious. The moment he stopped outside the base, Wang Ling suddenly realized a problem: the electronic map. After the Allied Air Command and spy satellites explode, the electronic map will disappear, and after the coalition radar explodes, the electronic map will also be blinded. Although Wang Ling memorized the general location of the Gobi War Zone and calculated the distance between the two places, he asked the group of subordinates to evacuate quickly. After leaving, if the radar burst and the electronic map disappeared, even if they reached the Gobi War Zone, Wang Ling wanted to finding those subordinates was a problem. Let's go to the Gobi War Zone first. There is no way. Now Wang Ling has no time to check the electronic map carefully, he still has to judge the direction and distance of each time travel movement. In this case, we can only take one step at a time. Huang Tian paid off, and with such non-stop movement across time and space, he finally successfully reached the Gobi War Zone after dozens of movements. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 959. The distance from the Holy City War Zone to the Gobi War Zone is thousands of kilometers. For such a long distance rescue, other forces, even the fastest air force or anti-aircraft crawlers, would never be able to make it in time. Even Wang Ling's time travel movement, dozens of consecutive movements, took 7 or 8 minutes. If it were a war in the real world, this time might not be too long, but now in the Red Alert world, the war mode is very different from reality. Such a long time is enough to determine the outcome. So during the whole process of traveling through time and space, you can imagine how anxious Wang Ling was. Now, we finally arrived at our destination. In the stiff time after arriving, Wang Ling was surprised to find that the electronic map of this war zone was not blinded yet. Relying on this convenience, Wang Ling quickly checked. Agent Tanya's base has now been completely destroyed by the group of rebellious subordinates, and now only traces of the war are left. And the battle at General Li Wiki's base is still going on. After such a long period of fierce fighting, most of the buildings that were not under control have been destroyed, and even the command post has exploded. However, the nuclear reactor and radar, these two major buildings, have been preserved, providing electricity and electronic maps. Looking carefully, it turned out that in front of these two large buildings, there were infantrymen from the Wolf Group and the Eagle Group who were desperately resisting, guarding the only remaining hope. Damn it, didn't I tell you to retreat? Why are you still fighting? Although their battle saved the electronic map, it also aroused Wang Ling's rage and impatience. However, he was still frozen and unable to move. Forcibly suppressing this impulse, Wang Ling subconsciously discovered a group of moving red light spots from a few minutes' drive outside the base. He quickly took a closer look and saw that they were a group of people from the Wolf Group and the Eagle Group. There are more than 10 infantrymen in total. If you look closely, you will see that all of these infantry are at the 5-star Special Forces level, while those who stay at the base to fight are all at the 7-star Ace level. Feelings on the way Wang Ling arrived, these surviving infantrymen also thought of the problem Wang Ling later noticed: electronic maps. Without the help of the electronic map, even if Wang Ling arrived here, it would be difficult to find troops, so he simply made the decision as he is now, leaving all his ace-level combat power to guard the electronic map to the death, leaving the hope of survival to those 5-star Special Forces. These little bastards. After realizing their purpose, Wang Ling was filled with sadness, but when he continued to look at the combat base, he became filled with anger. Staying to guard the electronic map is simply seeking death. Chen Tong has disappeared from the video, and many familiar faces at the ace level have also disappeared. There are only 6 remaining ace infantrymen, and their health all were severely damaged, and both Sundahu and Erlu had become severely disabled. Boom boom. And just when Wang Ling was watching this, as the last 2 shells were fired, Sundahu, who was at the front, was also killed and died heroically. That's not all. After killing Sundahu, these troops then pointed the finger at Erlu. With Erlu's current blood volume, it is estimated that Erlu will not be able to withstand even 1 round of bombardment. Seeing this, Wang Ling was so filled with hatred. Just when he was furious, this damn stiff time was finally over. Whoosh! Whoosh! After regaining his freedom, how could Wang Ling wait any longer? After 2 consecutive time travel movements, it took less than 2 seconds to break into this tragic battle circle. Oh! Oh ho! Boom! 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 The group of people in front of him were all his dearest subordinates at first, but now they were all classified as the Soul Empire, and they all posed a fatal threat to his remaining subordinates. Wang Ling no longer wanted to take action, so he had to fight. After entering, he suddenly released an extremely strong mental shockwave, killing all the remaining hundreds of charged infantry nearby. Even the anti-aircraft crawler vehicles could not escape, and they all exploded, with the shrill screams and explosions. The sound is so ironic now. This mental shockwave was truly the most powerful one Wang Ling had ever used since he mastered this skill. It almost squeezed his own mental strength. As a result, after it was released, his brain was in twitching pain. But he couldn't care less about howling in pain now, and before Erlu and the other 5 could react, he immediately released a circle of time-space fluctuations, enveloping the 5 soldiers, and instantly moved out of time and space, landing in front of the fleeing special forces. Team leader. Sir. Seeing Wang Ling coming, this group of infantrymen immediately stopped fleeing and hurriedly gave a military salute. However, after the standard military salute, the soldiers choked up one by one. When Wang Ling saw them like this, he was obviously very distressed, but he still cursed, "You are crying, what are you talking about? Are you men? Are you soldiers of the coalition?" Team leader, however, his scoldings not only failed to stop the group of people, but even the few ace infantrymen he brought started to cry. Erlu even shouted, "Brother Tiger is dead. There are so many brothers, are all dead." Team leader whining. It is said that men will not shed tears easily, but that is just before they are sad. Now, this group of 7-foot-old men who bleed, sweat, and not shed tears, all started crying, and the whimpering sound was like a sharp sword inserted into Wang Ling's heart, causing severe pain. After looking around at the dozen or so people present, Wang Ling felt a sore nose, but also shed tears. The majestic ace base, the heroic field team, and the large army of hundreds of people, now only these 10 people are left. The smiling faces of the past, the group of comrades who even risked their lives for him, are now almost all killed on the battlefield. Even Wang Ling couldn't accept the contrast between before and after. Team leader, what's going on? Okay, why did it suddenly happen like this? While he was grieving, Gu Suanwu asked this question. Although Li Tong and Gu Suanwu were also injected with intermediate enhancements, Wang Ling only asked them to stay in the temporary base as deputies in order to protect their safety. After all, there were only 2 of them left among the old comrades of the 5th Company, and Wang Ling really didn't want them to go to the battlefield again. Without fighting, the experience of the soldiers would naturally not reach the 7-star ace level. These 2 people were also among the more than 10 fleeing infantrymen this time. However, after hearing the question, Wang Ling sighed, "Leave here first, and when we get to a safe place, I will explain it in detail later. My roommate is getting married tomorrow, and it takes a lot of time to go there. I need to take 1 day off, so I won't write a separate leave note. I'm sorry. In the past 2 months, 2 classmates got married, and the money was lost. Now it's all negative income." Different dimension. Red alert world. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 960. The Gobi War Zone is over. Those comrades who were controlled have now all died in the battle. Wang Ling has rescued all the comrades who have not been controlled and survived and gathered them together. This war zone and the space are completely empty. That's where he focused his attention. However, it was not enough in the Holy City war zone. Those officers gathered together because of the meeting, and most of them survived and are still waiting in the Holy City war zone. Although the positions of these people were relatively safe, they would be discovered sooner or later. Wang Ling didn't have much time to waste, and he didn't even have time to explain, so he released a hypertemporal fluctuation circle, coercing the remaining comrades and heading towards the direction of the Holy City is moving. Different from the irritability and anxiety when he came, Wang Ling's anxiety had disappeared when he returned, but his heart was full of sadness. All the anger had nowhere to vent, so he had to compress it deep into his heart and become the present moment. Wang Ling's short-term motivation to live in the world of Red Alert. Now that he is no longer in a hurry, the way back is naturally not as turbulent as when he came on. He can only move the length of a few war zones at most at one time. It will take more than 10 seconds to return to normal and then continue to move. Each time the distance moved was shorter, more moves were naturally needed to make up for it. Wang Ling carried these more than 10 comrades and moved back and forth nearly 100 times before finally breaking into the Holy City war zone again. Today, the Holy City war zone has been completely occupied. All the buildings in the 3 bases have been pushed aside. The electronic map has become blind and cannot locate the accurate positions of the generals of the 2 armies. However, Wang Ling knew that now that all major war zones had fallen, the generals of both armies had nowhere to go. Without Wang Ling's help, they could only wait on the mountainside. And Wang Ling still remembered the general location. He moved several times through time and space, explored and moved forward, and finally landed at the Yuri base halfway up the mountain not long after. Wang Ling's guess was not wrong. Now the generals of the 2 armies and Agent Tanya are still waiting here, unable to go anywhere. Seeing Wang Ling return with more than 10 infantrymen, the generals of both armies finally breathed a sigh of relief. During the more than 10 minutes of waiting time, they could tense up at any time, fearing that enemy troops would suddenly attack and they would be unable to stop them without Wang Ling. Well, now, Wang Ling is back and has brought additional troops. The safety of many generals no longer has to worry about it. I have to admit that in the current environment, Wang Ling is still the patron saint of this group of generals. It's unbelievable. How far apart the 2 places are. We actually asked Wang Ling to bring someone back. As expected of Wang Ling. His soldiers are also very strong. They can persist until Wang Ling rescues them. This is a proof of their strength. Looking at the frozen state of Wang Ling and more than a dozen soldiers, all the generals, whether they were coalition forces or allies, all expressed their feelings from the bottom of their hearts. Even some of the allies who had complained about Wang Ling's departure before the general also had to admire him. Just as they were sighing, Wang Ling and more than a dozen soldiers also quickly ended their stiff time. A group of infantrymen experienced Wang Ling's movement through time and space throughout the whole process, and they are still in a daze. However, this group of generals appeared in front of them. They did not dare to be stunned. Many of them did not have time to dry their tears and they quickly performed military salutes. Call. But Wang Ling did not salute again. Instead, he took a deep breath and staggered to sit on the ground, his chest rising and falling. Wang Ling was really exhausted to a certain extent now. Before going to the rescue, Wang Ling was injured by the enemy because of bombing the electronic map building of the Allied base. The wound was so deep that his bones were visible. But he dragged on the injury, moved through time and space dozens or hundreds of times, and released mental shockwaves hysterically out of anger. These are all a big drain on Wang Ling. Even with Wang Ling's physical and mental strength, he is still very exhausted. This mental recovery is relatively slow, but after advanced strengthening, Wang Ling's physical recovery ability is extremely exaggerated. He had been in a state of stiffness for almost most of the time before, and his injuries had been delayed until now. Finally, he had temporarily stabilized. Wang Ling's body naturally entered a state of self-healing. All wounds were recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye. Of course, not only Wang Ling, but also the dozen or so soldiers he brought were recovering from their wounds, but they were not as perverted as Wang Ling. Regarding his recovery ability, no one at the scene found it strange. After all, this is the world of Red Alert. But in reality, it's a bit funny. When Wang Ling was recovering from his injuries in the Red Alert world, Wang Ling's body was also recovering in real life, and because of the jet lag, the recovery speed was even faster than that of Red Alert. All the bullet holes, burns, all healed quickly as if by magic. Even the wounds that were deep enough to show bone were growing flesh quickly. In less than a minute, the originally scarred body was healed as before. This exaggerated recovery ability really dumbfounded Wei Bowen and the three of them. They all looked at Wang Ling blankly, and then glanced at each other. For a long time, they couldn't say a word. My woo. However, Xiao He realized what was going on, and after knowing that Wang Ling was out of danger, he snorted slightly, then got back into the kennel and continued to sleep. Holy shit, am I not dazzled? What kind of monster has Wang Ling become now? His wounds can heal so quickly. It's just like those superheroes in the movies. After Xiao He lay down, the three of them calmed down, but they couldn't suppress the horror in their hearts for a while. Of course, Wang Ling didn't know about the three of them now. Now in the Red Alert world, after all his injuries were healed, he shook his head and gradually stood up. Wang Ling, awesome. Coach Rich walked slowly up to Wang Ling and gave him a thumbs up. But Wang Ling didn't have any sense of pride now. All the emotions in his heart were mixed together, and his eyes were a little red. Commander. Now all the war zones have fallen. Those comrades have either been controlled or annihilated. Now only it's time to leave them. Alas, but what can Coach Rich do? This sudden move by the Seoul Empire is like pulling out the firewood from under the cauldron, and will defeat the entire coalition and allied forces in an instant. It was only then that Gu Suanwu asked the old question again, Team leader, what is going on? Wang Ling gritted his teeth, calmed down his inner emotions, and then said, I am afraid that the Mind Empire has activated a backup plan to greatly expand the range of the Mind Beacon, covering all war zones almost instantly. As long as the Mind resists, the underpowered infantry, tanks, and even the various generals have been controlled. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 961. All War Zones. After noticing this word, Gu Suanwu and others were startled. They looked at the generals who were standing at the fire halfway up the mountain, or sitting on the rocks and sighing. They thought thoughtfully, so, the Holy City War Zone has also fallen. Yes, is that why the generals gathered here? Coach Rich shook his head and smiled bitterly, isn't that right? Thanks to agents Wang Ling and Tanya, otherwise, all our officers would have been punished at once. Erlu also suddenly barged in, is this why you suddenly held a meeting? The person who answered this time was General Li Wiki. It can be said that it is, but we didn't know the purpose of the Seoul Empire at the beginning. We gathered all the officers together and speculated for a long time before we guessed it. However, it was already too late at that time. It's too late, before we can take action to destroy it. The Mind Empire has already implemented this plan and single-handedly created this tragic situation. Erlu was stunned, while Li Tong said decadently, so, have we lost? No one at the scene was willing to answer this question, and everyone felt extremely heavy. But Li Tong seemed not to be aware of the depressing atmosphere and continued to ask, "Is there any other way? Is there anywhere else we can go? Brother Hu and the others are already dead." They tried their best to delay the group. It takes a long time for rescue, but even if you live, there is no hope and you can only wait for death. PoortoRich remained silent, and even the generals of the two major forces did not want to answer this question, with a bit of sadness on their faces. However, after being silent for more than 10 seconds, General Bob suddenly broke the news, "We don't have nowhere to go." General Bob, what do you mean? Where else can we go? All the generals, including Commander Rich, Agent Tanya and more than a dozen soldiers, all cheered up and urged after hearing these words. General Bob pondered for a moment and replied, "Although the control range of the Mind Empire's mind beacon has been expanded to the extreme, in fact, this control range does not cover the whole world, not even half." Huh? General Bob, how do you know? PoortoRich asked. General Bob replied, "Because our allied forces also have several bases in several locations in the southern hemisphere. I just checked and found that those bases are not affected by mind control." What? This was earth-shattering news, and almost all the generals on the scene exclaimed. The allied generals quickly looked at the electronic map, and indeed they saw several bases in the southern hemisphere. It was calm and without any disturbance, so they all looked happy. However, the faces of the coalition generals were somewhat uncertain. Indeed, they were relieved to learn that the Seoul Empire did not completely control the world, but this channel also made them quite unhappy. The battle for hegemony between the coalition forces is not just about global dominance, but more importantly, the distribution of global resources. As for the Allied forces, before the battle came to an end, all forces were concentrated in the northern hemisphere. However, the Allied forces relied on the convenience of satellites to quietly insert several bases and deploy them in the southern hemisphere. What is the purpose of these bases? The generals of the coalition forces are not stupid. They must be taking advantage of the war to quietly exploit resources in advance. This is a taboo of the coalition forces. PoortoRich directly warned, "General Bob, is it too shameless for your army to do this?" The Allied generals were embarrassed and did not answer, but General Bob laughed and said, "We are not afraid of deception. We are not as rigid as you. It is worthwhile to exploit more of these resources. Why do we have to wait for the outcome of the battle?" Snort. PoortoRich snorted coldly, feeling angry in his heart. But General Bob changed the subject, "Don't say we are shameless. This time it is our shamelessness that left us a way out. Otherwise, without those bases, where would we go now?" Although I felt unhappy, in fact, form was stronger than people. General Bob's words made it impossible for all the coalition generals to refute. It was related to the interests of the two armies. General Bob did not disclose all the coordinates of these bases. He only selected an island base to disclose and pointed it out to Wang Ling. "To be honest, if there were other choices, I would never go to your place," PoortoRich admitted, but he was still unforgiving. General Bob disagreed, "You really have no other choice. Wang Ling, there is no point in us staying in the Holy City war zone now, let's go there together. Although the Allied base in the southern hemisphere is safe, if a group of them wants to go there, they have to rely on Wang Ling's skills." Wang Ling did not refuse, but there was a slightly fierce light in his eyes. "Okay. But there is still something to do before going there." Varied. Chug tug tug. Bang bang. General Bob didn't have time to ask a word, but Wang Ling suddenly transformed into a seal and started shooting at the generals who were lying on the ground and being controlled. With the super-fast rate of fire, less than half 6 people were shot and killed in the blink of an eye. Wang Ling also planned to kill the last 2 people, but unexpectedly, Agent Tanya also pulled out a gun and shot the remaining 2 people before Wang Ling could. Being able to kill someone at Wang Ling's rate of fire, no wonder even Wang Ling was impressed by the speed at which he drew his gun. It's just that Wang Ling is not paying attention to the issues of shooting speed and gun drawing speed now. He just looks at Agent Tanya with a puzzled look on his face. Agent Tanya, on the other hand, acted like an old god, blowing on the muzzle of the gun, stuffing it, and then said, "You can't do everything by yourself." Cut. Wang Ling had nothing to say to her. Wang Ling. You, and Tanya. What do you want to do? As expected, this sudden move also shocked the remaining generals and even the commander. General Bob originally wanted to accuse Wang Ling, but after realizing it, he had to take Tanya with him. The other allied generals didn't look very good either, but after all, Tanya was also involved, so they couldn't blame them for a while. But Wang Ling glanced at him and asked, "Do you want to leave with 8 bombs that may explode at any time?" General Bob's face darkened. "Since we are going to shoot them now, why did we save them not long ago?" At this moment, General Bob, at the time of the incident, no one knew what happened. Of course, the first reaction was to save people. But now, there is obviously no way to relieve the control. Why should we still take them with us? Wang Ling argued, and Agent Tanya also responded, "Yes, and General, 8 of them have been controlled. If they are forcibly taken to our southern hemisphere base, there is no guarantee that they will not be exposed. Now, the Mind Empire has almost drained us. If it is exposed again, I'm afraid we really have no hope." Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 962. Although they were in different camps and had great hatred towards each other, it was Agent Tanya who had the most tacit understanding with Wang Ling. Others couldn't understand Wang Ling's actions for a while, but Agent Tanya not only understood it, but also helped Wang Ling share the pressure of accusation with her unique fighting power. For this reason, when Wang Ling looked at Tanya, he couldn't help but nodded and expressed some gratitude. As for the other generals and commanders, after hearing the two people's arguments, they had to shut up and acquiesce to what they said. Of course, the default was the default. Shooting the commander in front of these officers made them feel a little strange. Although these 8 people have been controlled, after all, they were commanders of the same level as them. But under the gunfire of agents Wang Ling and Tanya, he couldn't even hold on for a blink of an eye before he was shot dead. Almost all the commanders were a little frightened by this killing momentum. If they had slacked off and hadn't trained their mental resistance to the current level and were immune to large-scale mind control, they might have died at the hands of Wang Ling and Tanya. Those who were shot were also part of them, right? Of course, that's just a hypothesis, and after this time, I'm afraid it will never really come true. The hidden danger has been eliminated. Generals, Tanya, and the dozen of you, Li Tong, are you ready? After killing those commanders, Wang Ling was ready to move long distance. After everyone else was mentally prepared, Wang Ling suddenly strengthened into the form of a wild beast king, released a circle of superdimensional fluctuations and enveloped everyone, and disappeared with a swish sound. In the southern hemisphere, on an island close to the Antarctic continent, there is currently an Allied base operating. To say that this is a base, it is because there is a command post. In fact, the construction here is completely incomparable with conventional combat bases. The main building only has a few power plants, tank factories, spy satellites, and docks, and the defensive buildings there are only 2 light prism towers and 6 anti-aircraft missiles. As for its troops, there are only a dozen tanks, a dozen helicopters, and a dozen amphibious transport craft. The total number of infantrymen is only 100, and there are more than 10 engineers among them. After all, it is far away from the battle circle of the northern hemisphere and close to the Antarctic. Basically, there will be no war here. Therefore, the construction and defense here are not built according to the war model. All the soldiers are used to work. The working platform is the exploration well built on the sea. The island itself does not have many resources, but there is extremely rich natural gas and oil hidden under the water. The Allies have been eyeing this place for a long time. At this time, there are more than 10 infantrymen on the island, conducting symbolic patrols. Because there had been no fighting for a long time, these soldiers felt quite lazy when patrolling. According to common sense, they only need to patrol around the island 3 more times today before changing guard and resting. But while patrolling this circle, suddenly, aha! In the open space in front of them, a large trace of supertime and space fluctuations appeared, wrapped in dozens of figures, including the figures of the coalition forces, and the number was even greater than that of the Allies. Enemy attack. They are used to being at ease on the island. Where have these patrol soldiers seen such a formation? After seeing the uniforms of the coalition forces, he was immediately startled. He raised his gun and was about to shoot, but was stopped by a soldier on the side. Wait a minute, the coalition forces are allied with us now and are friendly forces. Friendly forces can't suddenly come to our island to explore and exploit secretly, but we can't let them know. This allied soldier seems to be a bit of a tiger. Quiet. But the captain of the patrol team suddenly noticed something, and hurriedly stopped them, and went forward to check, and then he was shocked. The allied forces moving in time and space in front of him were all generals, and they were all generals. There's an allied hero, Tanya. The coalition forces are not simple either. There are 5 lieutenants, more than 10 school officers, and the others all have general-level military ranks. Good guy, are the generals from both armies gathered together? Even if there are people coming to the island, there will be a large number of generals when they arrive. This weight is so big that it makes the whole island shake. Hurry up and call Lieutenant Colonel Lefu. For this reason, the squad leader was so frightened that his words trembled and stuttered. Not only him, but also the team members who originally shouted enemy attack turned green after observing the rank of the incoming man. They quickly obeyed the order and ran to the command post, falling down twice in a row along the way. Soon after, a middle-aged man ran out in a panic, followed by several deputies. This person is Lieutenant Colonel Lefu, the commander of the island base. He has not yet learned about the huge changes in the northern hemisphere. General Bob is coming and did not notify him in advance. Suddenly, he learned that the generals of the Allied and Allied forces were rushing to come, but this commander was scared to death. "General, what are you doing?" After staggering over, Lieutenant Colonel Lefu was about to salute and greet them, but suddenly he noticed their stiffness, and a lot of questions arose in his mind. However, they were a group of generals after all. Even in a frozen state, Lieutenant Colonel Lefu did not dare to move casually. He simply ordered the patrol team to stand up in a military posture and wait for the freezing time to end. This time travel movement came from a position relatively close to the Arctic Circle in the northern hemisphere, spanning almost half the length of the Earth. The stiff time naturally increased significantly. Ordinary Chrono Legion soldiers may take several hours to recover. Wang Ling's time was 10 times shorter, but he also experienced nearly half an hour of stiffness before it was finally lifted, and a group of generals regained their freedom of movement. "General! General!" After the stiffness was over, Lieutenant Colonel Rifle hurriedly led a group of infantrymen to salute. After General Bob gave a symbolic salute in return, he said, "The matter is urgent. We didn't notify you in advance when we came here. Are you surprised to see us coming?" Reporting to the general, "It is indeed very unexpected. And generals of the coalition forces, what are you doing?" Lieutenant Colonel Rifle was confused, and then several generals from the Allied forces briefly explained the great changes in the northern hemisphere. After hearing this, Lieutenant Colonel Lefu also panicked. "So in the battle with the Seoul Empire, both our armies lost. Well, it seems like it's a complete failure so far." Coach Rich figured it out during the stiff time and simply admitted defeat. However, some generals from the Allied forces are still insisting, "I am not convinced that we have failed." What is the Seoul Empire doing? It suddenly controls all the troops in the theater. If you have the ability, fight with real swords and guns. I don't believe they can win. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanchien Lang. Chapter 963. Indeed, the battle should have continued in full swing, and the two armies had even achieved a very obvious advantage when combined. If the fight continued as it was going, the Empire of the Soul would undoubtedly be defeated. But suddenly, the Soul Empire used some cheating method to control all the war zones in an instant, and almost wiped out the two armies without even using a single soldier. Everyone felt aggrieved by such a failed method. Not only the Allied general who spoke, but also the two commanders and even agents Wang Ling and Tanya were very unconvinced. However, what can you do if you are not convinced? Things have happened irreversibly. Although both armies have strong combat effectiveness, so far, they have been completely defeated. Then what should we do now? Is there any hope of making a comeback? Lieutenant Colonel Lefou had a bitter look on his face. It could be seen that this huge change had dealt a heavy blow to him. But he was not the only one who was hit. All the generals had uncertain faces, and even agents Wang Ling and Tanya fell silent. Hope is not completely lost. At least we are still alive. After a period of silence, Coach Richie spoke. In the current environment, everyone is filled with gloom and longing for hope, but these two simple words have become the most coveted motivation at the moment. Coach Rich mentioned hope at this time, which naturally attracted the attention of everyone present. They all looked at him and listened attentively. After looking around at everyone present, Coach Rich explained, "The coalition and allied forces still have the strongest appeal, and the two heroes and the strongest individual combat power are also still there. The Empire of Mind does not control the world. In the Southern Hemisphere, we can still absorb troops and rebuild the combat effectiveness of the two major forces." Yes, that's right. We are still here. The heroes are still here. Our leadership and combat effectiveness have all been preserved. A single spark can start a prairie fire. With our abilities, I don't believe we can't rebuild the two major forces. These words finally changed the previous decadent mood of the generals, and the slightest fighting spirit was ignited in their hearts. However, Wang Ling half cast his eyes in dismay. These words are easy to say, but how difficult it is to actually do it cannot be explained in just one or two sentences. How many years did the coalition and allied forces work hard and develop before they had the power and combat effectiveness they had before? How long will it take to restore the original glory in this state? How could the Empire of Mind remain indifferent during this period? After all, these words can't help but feel like you are lying to yourself. And how could other generals not know? However, no one pointed it out. Just like seeing a little bit of hope in despair, and seeing a little bit of light in the darkness, even if you know that this little bit of hope and light are very slim, it is much stronger than complete disappointment. After all, only with hope can we have motivation, no matter how illusory this hope is. We are tired now. Is there a room for us to rest? After barely appeasing the generals, General Bob asked again. Lieutenant Colonel Lefou quickly replied, "Yes. Generals, we have specially built a group of soldiers' dormitories here to make room for other soldiers to squeeze in. Generals can live in a single room without any problem. Okay, time to work." Where? Although he is a commander, his military rank is too low and there is a huge gap between him and the generals in front of him. When Lefou greeted General Bob, he felt somewhat humble. He ordered the patrol force to arrange for the coalition generals and Wang Ling and others, and he personally took General Bob and others to a relatively comfortable and luxurious residence on the island. The difference in treatment was quite obvious. However, the coalition forces are not willing to take this issue. Now that they have a place to stay, it is already a great blessing among misfortunes. After all, Wang Ling did not have enough military rank, so he was treated differently. Instead of being assigned to a single room, he lived in a double dormitory with Erlu. The treatment was pretty good. Finally finding a relatively stable place to stay, Wang Ling took a deep breath while lying on the bed, looking at the ceiling with a lot of emotion. Erlu, who was always funny and good at enlivening the atmosphere, was extremely silent at this time, lying motionless on the bed, as if he was asleep. Wang Ling didn't take the initiative to say hello to him, he also wanted to rest. But unexpectedly, as soon as he closed his eyes, he heard the choking sound of donkey. Donkey, why are you crying? Wang Ling couldn't stand the sound of crying, so he sat up again and scolded, Masters, are you crying all day long? But Erla couldn't listen at all, team leader. We of you, I don't want to either. But we of you, I miss Brother Hu and the others. We of you, they are all gone. I feel very confused in life. Team leader. Originally, he wanted to continue scolding him, but Erlu's cries became increasingly uncontrollable, and his sad mood actually affected Wang Ling. Yes, the comrades of the Wolf Group and the Eagle Group, especially veteran soldiers like Sun Dehu and Chen Tong, have accompanied Wang Ling in the north and south for too long, and Wang Ling already regards them as brothers in his heart. But now, these brothers and comrades in arms have all died in battle. Recalling Sun Dehu's expression when he stabbed his head, recalling Chen Tong's disobedient look, and recalling the mischievous guys in the Wolf Group, Wang Ling's nose became more and more sore. He wanted to control it, but he couldn't control it at all, and the corners of his eyes slipped. A few tears fell, but they were quickly wiped away. Originally, he wanted to scold Erlu or comfort him, but now Wang Ling found that even he himself couldn't bear this kind of blow, and he was full of sadness. Really not wanting to stay in this environment any longer, Wang Ling simply said nothing, lay down and went directly back to the system's transfer station. Hey, are you crying? In the transfer station, Uncle He looked at Wang Ling with a half-smile as if he was gloating about his misfortune. At first, Wang Ling was indeed speechless and could only remain silent. But after looking at Uncle He for a while, he suddenly remembered something, and he let out a silly laugh. Yes, Uncle He, I remembered that those comrades, I can use the system's exchange system to redeem them all. They are dead in the red alert world, but the system can redeem them into the real world, and like Xiao He, survive in another way. In Wang Ling's heart, he couldn't accept the tragic defeat of red alert world for a while. If all the comrades who died in battle were resurrected to the real world as he said, then there would be no need to go back to red alert world. However, Uncle He laughed and said, you are deceiving yourself. Wang Ling, you are not as strong as I thought. Do you lose control when you encounter setbacks? Have you forgotten the rules of the system? Only your camp will die, or you will die only with the number of enemy troops can you exchange. It is true that you can exchange for a group of people, but more people will never be seen again. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 964. This guy, Uncle He, really doesn't care about anything, he has a very poisonous mouth. However, Uncle He was indeed right. Most of Wang Ling's subordinates will never be seen again. Although the simulated life materialization of the exchange system can exchange creatures in the game into the real world, it is also limited. It can only be exchanged for one's own subordinates, or troops from the same camp who have interacted with Wang Ling, or those who have been the enemy troops he killed with his own hands. Those with higher status than Wang Ling and those from hostile camps cannot be redeemed. The Mind Empire suddenly expanded the control range of the Mind Beacon, and most of the Wolf Group and Eagle Group troops were instantly controlled. These people have been classified as the Mind Empire, and the initial conditions are not met and cannot be redeemed. During the subsequent battle, Sun Dehuo and others actually killed a considerable number of the accused troops, and these were unable to recover. Those who can be redeemed are now fully accounted for, that is, the group of troops that were not controlled, and the nearly 100 infantrymen killed by Wang Ling using the mental shock wave. The total number combined is less than half of the two field groups. Although war is constantly accompanied by sacrifices, members of major field groups also change from time to time. After all, the Iron Camp is full of soldiers. However, relatively speaking, the replacement of members of the Wolf Group and the Eagle Group is very slow. After getting along for a long time, a deep friendship will inevitably develop, and it will be difficult for Wang Ling to let go of the remaining infantry. After listening to Uncle He's words, Wang Ling fell silent. The sad look on his face made even Uncle He feel a little bit unbearable. They are all system programs. Are you so open-minded about some programs? Wang Ling asked dejectedly. Uncle He, strictly speaking, you are also a program, right? What if one day you have an accident and die? Should I be sad? Should I be sad? This time it was Uncle He's turn to be silent. Recently, Wang Ling always used these questions to block Uncle He, but Uncle He didn't know how to answer at all. As an artificial intelligence brain, he seems to be particularly troubled by human emotions. And Wang Ling didn't want to talk any more about this issue, so he simply returned to the real world. In the dormitory in the real world, Wei Bowen and the three of them were still surrounding Wang Ling and did not leave for several minutes. The shock on their faces was as exciting as each other. Before they dispersed, Wang Ling had already woken up. He didn't have time to put on his pajamas again, and even the quilt was lifted off. However, Wang Ling didn't even bother to pay attention to them. In front of three astonished eyes, slowly sat up, inserted his hands into his hair and grabbed it, giving people a crazy feeling. Wei Bowen and the others didn't know what was going on in the red alert world, so they didn't notice Wang Ling's emotions. After they calmed down, they all started to marvel. Holy shit, Wang Ling, are you awake? You're more perverted than we thought. So many wounds, healed so quickly. Wang Ling, you are such a pervert. The wound heals itself. This ability is no worse than teleportation. Why didn't you tell us about this skill? The three of them chattered for a while, but Wang Ling kept his behavior. His hair fell out a lot and his face turned a little dark. After the three people marveled, they finally noticed Wang Ling's mood. Wei Bowen asked tentatively, No, Wang Ling, what's wrong with you? You feel quite lost. Dongfang Yuking also asked, Did something happen in the red alert world? The three of them already knew the secret, so Wang Ling didn't hide it too much and simply nodded to admit it. Zhang Shenke then laughed, As for you, in this illusory world, if anything happens, you won't be implicated. However, Wang Ling replied with a grimace, You have never experienced it? You don't know how it feels. It's quite painful. Then let us also experience it. Dongfang Yuking's eyes lit up, but Wang Ling glared back with sharp eyes. Even Wei Bowen and Zhang Shenke gave him a look. Knowing that she had said the wrong thing, Dongfang Yuking quickly covered her mouth and could not answer any more words. Of course, although part of Wang Ling's secret was revealed, the real situation in the red alert world cannot be explained in detail. Wang Ling didn't want to worry them all the time, so he simply drove them away. Okay, go ahead and play with you, I'm fine. Okay, then remember to tell us if you have anything to do. The three of them saw that they couldn't find anything out, so they simply stopped asking. After sending the three of them away, Wang Ling lay down again and stared at the wooden board on the upper bunk in a daze. Boy, I didn't want to tell you originally, but I really can't get used to your decadent look. Uncle He in the transfer station seemed to have forgotten Wang Ling's problem. At this time, he took the initiative to contact Wang Ling. Things are not irreversible. We must look forward in everything. Sometimes a situation that seems hopeless is actually there is also hidden vitality. What do you mean? Wang Ling suddenly raised his eyebrows and asked in his mind. But Uncle He was careless about this key issue. I don't have the authority to tell you the details. I can only reveal that the current situation in the red alert world is not a dead end, and you don't need to do anything specifically. Just wait for the miracle to come. Miracle? Is it reliable? Wang Ling was confused, but if he continued to ask, Uncle He refused to say anything. There was no other way. Wang Ling could only think hard about these two words. However, with the current situation in the red alert world, no matter what he thought, he didn't know what miracles would happen. Forget it, Uncle He, I believe you this time, no matter what, even the system steward has said so, and there is no point in Wang Ling worrying anymore. After looking away for a while, Wang Ling also gained some motivation and vitality. His pajamas and bedding were all stained with blood, making it awkward to lie down on. Wang Ling simply changed them overnight, rinsed them, and then lay down comfortably on them. Speaking of which, Wang Ling was indeed tired now. He closed his eyes and fell asleep in less than a minute. Life in the real world is still as usual, and the day passes quickly with a hazy cultivation. At night, when he lay on the bed and was about to enter the world of red alert, Wang Ling hesitated. To be honest, Wang Ling was opposed to the current situation in the red alert world from the bottom of his heart. The gloomy and desperate atmosphere and mood were really uncomfortable, especially when he saw other people choked and depressed. It was even more torturous. However, thinking of Uncle He's words, Wang Ling gritted his teeth and returned again. Wang Ling was so curious about the miracle that Uncle He mentioned. What kind of miracle could reverse the current situation? Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 965. Wu. When Wang Ling returned to the Red Alert World, Erlu was still choking with sobs, and his sad look really made Wang Ling's heart tremble. However, this time Wang Ling didn't persuade him anymore. He closed his eyes and just listened. It took nearly half an hour before the guy finally stopped. Wang Ling opened his eyes and saw that Erlu had fallen asleep. Alas, Wang Ling was also filled with helplessness. He stared blankly for a while, then stepped forward to cover Erlu with a quilt, and prayed to himself, I hope this miracle can really reverse the current situation. The time in the red alert world is just approaching noon, but after experiencing so many things in a row, almost everyone feels physically and mentally exhausted. Many people have already taken a rest like two donkeys. However, Wang Ling had made the transition to the real world, and Uncle He's revelation had made him somewhat relieved now. He really couldn't sleep anymore, so he simply left the dormitory and went out for a walk. Despite what Lieutenant Colonel Kanfu said grandly, all generals have been assigned single rooms, but in fact the number of dormitories on the island is limited. Based on the original number of infantry, there are not that many at all. It was just to temporarily free up the infantry's dormitories. When Wang Ling went out, he saw these allied infantry setting up tents. After all, the dormitories were given to the generals. This group of infantrymen did not dare to complain. However, the tragic battle conditions in the northern hemisphere seemed to have reached their ears. When setting up camp, they could clearly feel the boredom among this group of infantrymen. So rich that it is almost difficult to dissolve. In this regard, Wang Ling could only sigh and could not say anything. I am afraid that this atmosphere will become the norm for a long time to come. The island is not too big. After leaving the dormitory, Wang Ling walked to the beach soon and saw the infantrymen who were still busy. Although the northern hemisphere is currently in turmoil and the two armies are almost depleted, work on the islands must continue. After all, Recruiting troops and rebuilding the combat effectiveness of the two armies also requires funds. No matter how disgusted the coalition forces were with this, they had to acquiesce to this exploration and mining practice. Goo goo. While Wang Ling was watching the work of this group of infantry as a spectator, a group of seagulls flew from the distance, moving in the wind, spreading their wings and flying high. Their joyful cries seemed to be singing about the most rare freedom in the world. Under the cool sea breeze, Wang Ling couldn't help but take a deep breath, and then shouted loudly, as if to relieve the depression and troubles in his heart. After all, the island is so big, and the exploration well is not far from the island. Wang Ling's voice also frightened the allied soldiers who were working. They all turned their heads to glance at Wang Ling, seeming quite dissatisfied. But Wang Ling didn't care about these looks. After venting his anger, he sat on the rocks on the edge of the island and looked at the sea. In the world of Red Alert, we are usually either fighting or making various preparations for the battle. Now, although the two armies are almost defeated and all the war zones have fallen, on the other hand, those who survived and came to this island are actually there was also a rare moment of leisure. No matter how much pressure there will be in the future, no matter what miracle Uncle Hay talks about, at least now, Wang Ling doesn't need to think so much. Da. Wang Ling. Just when Wang Ling was distracted, footsteps slowly came from behind him, and then he heard Agent Tanya's call. When he turned around, he found a black object rushing towards Wang Ling. He subconsciously stretched out his hand to grab it. After a closer look, he saw that it was a whole bottle of unopened red wine. Agent Tanya also strolled behind, apparently looking for Wang Ling specifically. "What brings you here?" Wang Ling showed a rare smile. But Tanya rolled her eyes. "I have the nerve to say that I was sleeping when I was suddenly woken up by your shouting. I can't sleep anymore." Wang Ling was embarrassed. The island was not big, and that voice woke up many people. Drink, however, Tanya didn't blame him much. Instead, she slowly sat down next to her and pointed to the red wine bottle. Wang Ling shook the bottle. "Where did it come from?" "It's ready-made in the dormitory. I don't know if I forgot to take it away when the dormitory was opened, or if it was originally left with us. I still have a whole box there," Tanya answered. And Wang Ling didn't show any politeness to her. He touched the cork of the wine bottle with his right index finger, controlled the ultra-temporal light wave exquisitely, wrapped it alone, wiped out the cork in almost the blink of an eye, and then drank it directly with his head raised. "One mouthful. Don't drink so hard, save some for me." Tanya only brought one bottle. After Wang Ling finished drinking, she grabbed the bottle and imitated Wang Ling's movements, and started drinking directly. Wang Ling smiled playfully. "Hey, don't you dislike my dirty mouth? Tch, am I that germophobic?" After Tanya finished speaking, she handed the wine bottle to Wang Ling. Her bold and unrestrained look was no worse than that of an ordinary man. With such a beautiful woman by his side, Wang Ling naturally wouldn't dislike it and naturally took another sip. However, after taking a few sips of red wine, the two fell silent again, staring blankly at the sea in front of them. They didn't say a word for a long time, they just kept switching bottles. It didn't take long. "All done." At this time, Wang Ling sighed. "As far as I can remember, I haven't had such a pleasant drink in a long time." Yes, Tanya also cooperated, and even added a sigh. "It's all because of the war. I'm always tired of fighting. I don't know when I might die in battle. How can it be like now?" Wang Ling didn't reply, but Tanya started talking to herself. How great would it be if there was no war? It would be a kind of freedom to maintain the life we have now. Wang Ling was a little surprised by these words. He turned to look at her and said with a smile, "You said it easily. Did those comrades who died in the battle die in vain? And even if we hide here, the Empire of the Heart is really. Will you let us go? This war is not something you and I can control at all. Of course I know this, but I'm tired of this kind of fighting, Agent Tanya said in front of Wang Ling, something that no one in the Allied forces dared to say. She became famous because of the war and eventually became a hero of the Allied forces. However, Tanya herself did not like war in her heart. If she said this, she would probably shock many Allied soldiers, right? Not to mention everyone else. Wang Ling was a little surprised. He looked at Tanya and didn't speak for a while. Is it weird? Tanya glanced at Wang Ling and hugged her legs, as if to keep warm. After being silent for a while, she raised her head and asked, "Hey, Wang Ling, if the Allied and coalition forces fight again in the future, will you kill me if you run into me?"